The first gunshot echoed across the valley like thunder on a clear day, shattering the stillness of the New Mexico dusk as Clara Sinclair pressed her back against the barn wall, her wedding dress catching on the splintered wood. Tears streamed down her face, not from sadness but from the pure terror of knowing Bernard Wells was out there, hunting for his runaway bride. Clara's breath came in shallow gasps as she clutched the small leather satchel containing everything she owned in the world. Just 24 hours ago, she had been resigned to her fate marriage to a man her father owed more money than he could ever repay. A man known throughout Aztec, New Mexico, for his cruelty toward those who crossed him. Now she was running for her life, her wedding day turned into an escape that might very well end in her capture or death. "Miss Sinclair," a low voice whispered from the shadows, causing her heart to leap into her throat. Cole Archer emerged from the darkness, his hand outstretched. In the silver moonlight, she could see concern etched across his features, a stark contrast to the confident cowboy who had approached her the previous evening with an audacious plan to help her escape. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My father and Mr. Wells, they've found out I'm gone." "Then we don't have much time," Cole replied, taking her satchel and guiding her toward the pair of horses waiting in the shadows. "Can you ride in that dress?" Clara glanced down at the white lace and silk that was to have been her prison uniform. "I can ride in anything if it means getting away from Bernard Wells." The year was 1885, and Aztec was still little more than an outpost in the New Mexico territory. Women had few options beyond the marriages their fathers arranged, especially when family debts were involved. Clara had watched her father gamble away her mother's inheritance after her death 3 years ago, falling deeper into debt until Bernard Wells, the wealthy rancher with a reputation for breaking both horses and wives, offered a solution: her hand in marriage in exchange for forgiveness of all debts. "Mount up," Cole instructed, his voice firm but gentle. "We need to reach the canyon before sunrise. They'll be looking for 2 riders on the main trails." Clara gathered the voluminous fabric of her dress and, with Cole's assistance, swung herself onto the mare. The animal was steady beneath her, a calm presence amid her racing thoughts. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, the question that had burned in her mind since Cole had approached her the night before at the edge of her father's property, offering her escape. Cole's eyes, deep and serious, met hers. No one deserves to be sold like cattle, especially not to a man like Wells. He mounted his own horse with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. "Besides, I've had my own dealings with Wells. Let's just say I owe him some discomfort." Another gunshot cracked the night air, closer this time, followed by shouts. Clara flinched. "That's our cue to leave," Cole said, nudging his horse forward. "Stay close and follow my lead." Together they rode into the darkness, leaving behind the only home Clara had ever known. The cool desert air whipped past her face, carrying with it the scent of sage and freedom. She had no idea what lay ahead, only that it had to be better than the fate she'd narrowly escaped. For 3 hours they rode in near silence, Cole occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning of rough terrain ahead. Clara was grateful for his knowledge of the land. In the moonlight, every rock formation looked the same to her untrained eyes. As the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky, they reached a narrow passage between towering sandstone walls. Cole led them into the labyrinthine canyon, following what appeared to be a dry creek bed until they reached a small clearing surrounded by juniper trees and sheltered by overhanging rock. "We'll rest here," Cole said, dismounting and helping Clara from her horse. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her, stiff from the long ride and trembling with exhaustion. Cole caught her arm, steadying her. His touch was gentle but firm, so different from Bernard's bruising grip when he had inspected her at their engagement announcement. "Thank you," she murmured, embarrassed by her weakness. "You've done well," Cole replied, releasing her arm once she was stable. "Most women I know would have collapsed hours ago." Clara managed a small smile. "I'm not most women." "That," he said with a nod of appreciation, "is becoming increasingly clear." He busied himself with unsaddling the horses. "There's a spring just beyond those trees. You might want to change out of that dress. I packed some clothes that should fit you well enough." Clara glanced down at her once pristine wedding gown, now torn and dirt-streaked. "I'd be happy to never see white lace again." Cole reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small bundle, handing it to her. "They belong to my sister. She's about your size." Clara accepted the bundle with surprise. "You have a sister?" A shadow crossed Cole's face. "Had. She passed 3 winters ago. Consumption." "I'm sorry," Clara said, understanding the pain of loss all too well. "I lost my mother to the same." Something passed between them then, a moment of shared understanding that needed no words. Cole nodded toward the trees. "Go on, I'll keep watch. We're not safe yet, not by a long shot." The spring was small but clear, bubbling from a crack in the red rock. Clara knelt beside it, setting down the bundle of clothes before cupping her hands to drink. The water was cool and sweet, washing away the dust of their journey from her parched throat. She glanced over her shoulder to ensure her privacy before slowly unbuttoning the wedding dress. As it slipped from her shoulders, she felt as though she were shedding not just fabric but the weight of her father's expectations and the terror of life with Bernard Wells. She kicked the dress aside and quickly washed in the spring, the cold water shocking her system awake despite her exhaustion. Cole's sister's clothes, a simple cotton shirt, riding skirt, and sturdy boots fit reasonably well. As Clara braided her long chestnut hair, she caught sight of her reflection in the still water. The face that looked back at her was changed somehow, the fearful expression she'd worn for months replaced by something more determined. When she returned to the clearing, Cole had built a small, nearly smokeless fire and was brewing coffee in a battered tin pot. "Better?" he asked, looking up from his task. "Much," Clara replied, sitting on a flat rock across from him. "Though I wonder what to do with this." She held up the wedding dress, now a crumpled pile of expensive fabric. Cole considered it for a moment. "We could leave pieces of it along false trails." "Might buy us some time if they're tracking us." Clara nodded, the practical suggestion making perfect sense. "You've done this before, haven't you? Helped someone escape." Cole handed her a tin cup of coffee. "Drink this. You need the strength." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. "Not exactly like this, no, but I know what it means to run from something that would destroy you." There was a story there, Clara realized, but now was not the time to press. They were still too close to Aztec, too vulnerable. "What's our plan? Where are we going?" "South to Las Cruces. I have friends there who can help get you across to Arizona territory if needed. Wells has influence, but it doesn't extend that far." He took a sip of his own coffee. "After that, it's up to you. You'll be free to make your own way." Free. The word resonated in Clara's chest like the toll of a bell. Freedom had seemed an impossible dream just days ago. "And what about you?" she asked quietly. "Won't Wells come after you for this?" Cole's mouth curved in a grim smile. "Bernard Wells and I have unfinished business that predates you, Miss Sinclair. Sooner or later we would have come to blows." "Clara," she corrected him. "Please call me Clara. After riding through the night together, I think we can dispense with formalities." His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she noticed their unusual color, a warm amber that reminded her of honey in sunlight. "Clara, then," he agreed. They finished their coffee in companionable silence as the sky lightened. Clara found herself studying Cole Archer more carefully in the growing light. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. His lean frame spoke of a life spent outdoors, and the way he moved, always alert, always ready, told her he was accustomed to danger. "We should move on soon," Cole said, dousing the fire with dirt. "They'll have search parties out by now. How long until Las Cruces?" Clara asked, standing and brushing dust from her skirt. 4 days if we're careful, 3 if we push hard." He glanced at her. "But pushing hard means riding main trails, which puts us at risk of being seen." Clara nodded, understanding the dilemma. "Careful, then." "I've waited 22 years for freedom. I can wait a few more days." Cole smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "There's that spirit I was counting on." He began resaddling the horses. "We'll cut through the backcountry, stay off the main routes. It's rougher terrain, but safer." "I grew up riding these hills," Clara said, moving to help with the horses. "I can handle rough terrain." As they prepared to leave, Cole handed Clara a small revolver. "Do you know how to use this?" She took the weapon, surprised by its weight. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12. He said a woman alone on the frontier needed to protect herself." The irony that she now needed protection from the very man who had given that advice was not lost on her. "Good, keep it close." Cole mounted his horse, scanning the horizon. "Let's ride." They set off as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, bathing the desert in golden light. Clara felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration as they rode. Every crack of a twig, every distant bird call made her start, certain it was Bernard or her father closing in. Yet beneath the fear was something else, a growing sense of possibility that made her sit taller in the saddle. They traveled through winding canyons and across stretches of open desert, Cole always choosing the path less traveled. By midday, the heat had become oppressive, and Clara's throat felt like sandpaper despite the canteen she sipped from sparingly. "There's a trading post about an hour ahead," Cole said, noting her discomfort. "Run by an old friend, Thomas Redfield. We can resupply and rest during the worst of the heat." "Won't that be risky?" Clara asked. "Someone might recognize me." "Tom's no friend of Wells. Besides, it's off the main road, mostly serves the Navajo and a few prospectors. Unlikely anyone from Aztec would stop there." The trading post appeared like a mirage in the shimmering heat, a low adobe building with a wooden porch sagging under the weight of years. A few horses stood in the shade of a ramada, tails swishing at flies. Cole dismounted first, scanning the area before helping Clara down. "Let me do the talking," he murmured as they approached the building. The interior of the trading post was cool and dim after the brightness outside. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with everything from ammunition to canned peaches. Behind a rough-hewn counter stood a man with a shock of white hair and a beard that reached nearly to his belt buckle. "Well, I'll be damned," the old man said, peering at Cole over spectacles perched precariously on his nose. "Cole Archer, thought you were dead." "Not yet, Tom, though not for lack of trying." Cole approached the counter, keeping his voice low. "We need supplies and a place to rest for a few hours." Tom's shrewd eyes moved to Clara, taking in her borrowed clothes and tense posture. "And who might this young lady be?" "This is Clara," Cole said simply, offering no explanation. "She's with me." Understanding dawned in the old man's rheumy eyes. "Ah, I see." He nodded slowly. "Well, any friend of Cole's is welcome here. There's a back room with a cot." "Miss, you're welcome to rest there while I catch up with this scoundrel." Clara glanced at Cole, who nodded reassuringly. "Thank you," she said to Tom. "That's very kind." The back room was small but clean, with a narrow window that let in strips of sunlight through wooden slats. Clara sank onto the cot, her muscles aching from the unfamiliar hours in the saddle. Though exhaustion pulled at her, she found herself unable to sleep, her mind replaying the events that had brought her here. She thought of her father's face when he'd told her of the arrangement with Bernard Wells, not apologetic, but relieved, as though he'd solved a particularly difficult puzzle. "He's wealthy, Clara," he'd said. "You'll never want for anything." What her father failed to understand was that she'd gladly live in poverty if it meant choosing her own path. Bernard Wells's wealth came with a price too steep to pay. His reputation for cruelty was well earned. His first wife had died under mysterious circumstances, and rumors abounded that he had beaten her regularly. The second had fled in the night, never to be seen again. Clara had been preparing to follow the second wife's example, planning a desperate escape on her own, when Cole Archer had appeared at the edge of her father's property the night before her wedding. He'd approached her as she'd stood alone on the porch, staring at the stars and wondering if she would ever see them again as a free woman. "Miss Sinclair," he'd said quietly, materializing from the darkness like a spirit, "I believe you're in need of assistance." She'd nearly screamed before recognizing him as one of the cowboys who occasionally did business with her father. They'd spoken only once before, a brief exchange at the general store months earlier, yet somehow he'd known of her plight. "How dare you approach me like this?" she'd whispered fiercely, glancing over her shoulder to ensure no one inside the house could see them. "If my father or Mr. Wells—" "I know what Wells is," Cole had interrupted, his voice low and urgent. "And I know what tomorrow means for you. I'm offering you a way out." At first, she'd thought it a cruel joke or worse, a trap. But something in his eyes had conveyed sincerity, and desperation had made her listen as he outlined his plan. He would bring horses to the edge of the property at midnight. She was to pack only what she could carry and meet him there. They would ride south, away from Aztec and Bernard Wells's influence. "Why would you risk this for me?" she'd asked, still suspicious despite her hope. Cole's expression had darkened. "Let's just say I have my reasons for wanting to see Wells suffer a disappointment." "Will you be there?" Clara had nodded, committing herself to a dangerous path with a man she barely knew, because the alternative was unthinkable. Now, lying on a stranger's cot in a remote trading post, she wondered if she'd made the right choice. Cole Archer was still largely a mystery to her, his motivations unclear. Yet he had risked his life to help her escape, and that counted for something. She must have dozed off despite her racing thoughts, for the next thing she knew, Cole was gently shaking her awake. "We need to move," he said, his expression tense. "Tom's heard rumors. Wells has men searching all the way to Santa Fe." Clara sat up quickly, pushing her hair from her face. "How did they spread the word so fast?" "Telegraph," Cole replied grimly. "Wells has money and connections. They're offering a reward for information." Fear clutched at Clara's throat. "How much time do we have?" "Not much. Tom's going to spread word that he saw a woman matching your description heading north toward Colorado. Should buy us some time." Cole handed her a small package. "Food for the trail. Let's go." They slipped out the back door of the trading post, mounting quickly. Tom appeared, handing Cole a folded piece of paper. "Alternative route," the old man explained. "Longer but safer. Nobody uses those old mining trails anymore." Cole nodded his thanks. "I owe you, Tom," the old man waved him off. "Just don't get yourself killed, boy. And keep that young lady safe." He glanced at Clara. "Good luck to you, miss. You've got courage, I'll give you that." They rode hard for the remainder of the day, following Tom's map through increasingly rugged terrain. The sun was setting when Cole finally signaled a halt beside a shallow creek bordered by cottonwood trees. "We'll camp here," he said, dismounting stiffly. "There's enough cover and the horses need rest." Clara slid from her saddle, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. Every muscle in her body protested the day's exertion. "I never thought I'd say this, but I miss that cot at the trading post." Cole's mouth quirked in a half-smile as he unsaddled the horses. "The ground's not so bad once you get used to it." "Is that supposed to be comforting?" Clara asked, managing a tired smile of her own. "Just honest." He picketed the horses where they could graze on the sparse grass near the creek. "I'll get a fire going, small one just enough to heat some coffee and beans." Clara moved to help, gathering small branches and kindling. As she worked, she found herself studying Cole again, noting the efficient way he moved, the watchfulness that never seemed to leave him even in this seemingly peaceful spot. "You said you have unfinished business with Wells," she said as they sat by the small fire later, eating beans from tin plates. "What did you mean by that?" Cole was silent for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, but she could hear the undercurrent of anger beneath it. "6 years ago, I worked for Bernard Wells," he began, staring into the flames. "I was young, needed the money. His ranch was the biggest operation in the territory back then." He paused, taking a sip of coffee. "I had a younger sister, Cora, beautiful girl, smart as a whip. Our parents died when we were young. I raised her best I could." His jaw tightened. "Wells took an interest in her, started coming around when I wasn't there. She was barely 18. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. "What happened?" She refused his advances. "Wells doesn't take rejection well." Cole's knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. "One night he cornered her in town, got rough. My friend Charlie stepped in, pulled Wells off her. There was a fight." His voice grew quieter. "Wells shot Charlie dead, claimed self-defense. With his money and connections, the territorial court believed him. No charges filed." Clara felt sick. "And your sister," Cora was never the same after that, started coughing that winter. By spring, she was gone. Cole set down his cup, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "Consumption," the doctor said, "but grief can weaken a body, make it susceptible. She died because of Wells, one way or another." "I'm so sorry," Clara whispered, understanding now the depth of his determination to thwart Wells. This wasn't just about helping her, it was about justice long denied. "After she died, I left the territory for a while. Rode with a cattle outfit up in Wyoming, then did some scouting for the Army. Came back to New Mexico last year." His eyes met hers across the fire. "When I heard Wells was set to marry you, I started asking questions. Didn't take long to learn you weren't exactly a willing bride." "No," Clara agreed quietly. "I wasn't." "The way I see it," Cole continued, "helping you escape is just the beginning of what Wells has coming to him." Clara studied his face, seeing the pain and anger etched there. "Revenge won't bring Cora back," she said gently. "I know that." Cole's voice was rough. "But maybe it keeps other women from suffering at his hands. Maybe it balances the scales just a little." They fell silent, the weight of shared confidences hanging between them. Clara understood now what drove Cole Archer, and it wasn't just altruism. He carried wounds as deep as her own, though different in nature. "We should sleep," Cole finally said, breaking the silence. "I'll take first watch. You get some rest." Clara nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. Cole handed her a bedroll, which she spread near the fire. "Cole," she said as he turned to move toward the perimeter of their small camp. "Thank you for telling me about Cora and for helping me, whatever your reasons." He nodded once, his expression softening slightly. "Get some sleep, Clara. Tomorrow will be another long day." Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully to Clara that night. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Bernard Wells's face, twisted with rage as he hunted for her. When she finally did sleep, her dreams were chaotic, filled with pounding hoofbeats and the sound of gunfire. She awoke to Cole gently shaking her shoulder. The sky was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading from view. "Time to go," he said, already having packed most of their small camp. "I heard riders about an hour ago heading north. Could be nothing, but I don't want to take chances." They ate a cold breakfast of jerky and hardtack, washing it down with water from the creek. Within 20 minutes, they were mounted and riding, following the increasingly narrow trail that Tom had marked on his map. The day passed in a blur of dust and heat. They spoke little, saving their energy for the difficult terrain. By midday, they had entered a landscape of towering mesas and deep canyons, the trail sometimes disappearing entirely, forcing Cole to navigate by the sun and landmarks noted on the map. Late in the afternoon, as they picked their way down a steep, rocky slope, Clara's horse suddenly stumbled, letting out a pained whinny. Cole was off his mount in an instant, examining the mare's foreleg. "She's strained a tendon," he said after careful inspection. "Nothing broken, but she can't carry you, not on this terrain." Clara dismounted, stroking the horse's sweaty neck. "What do we do?" Cole considered their options, looking at the map. "There's an old mining settlement about 5 miles ahead. We'll have to double up on my horse until we reach it. Maybe we can find another mount there." "And if we can't," Clara asked, "then we continue with one horse, traveling lighter and slower." His expression was grim. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." They transferred Clara's essential belongings to Cole's saddlebags, leaving behind anything they could spare. Clara mounted behind Cole, holding tightly to his waist as they set off, leading the injured mare at a walk. The close contact was unfamiliar and somewhat uncomfortable for Clara. She'd never been this physically close to a man who wasn't family, and she found herself acutely aware of the solid warmth of Cole's back against her chest, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "You all right back there?" Cole asked after they'd been riding for nearly an hour. "Yes," Clara replied, trying to ignore the strangeness of their situation. "Just worried about how much this slows us down." "We're still moving forward," Cole said, his voice reassuring. "That's what matters." The mining settlement, when they finally reached it as the sun was setting, turned out to be little more than a collection of dilapidated wooden structures clinging to the side of a hill. Most of the buildings had collapsed, their timbers bleached silver by years of sun and wind. But one structure, a combination stable and bunkhouse, remained mostly intact. "Not exactly the Aztec Hotel," Cole commented as they approached the building, "but it'll provide shelter for the night." Inside, the stable portion was dusty but sound, with several empty stalls. They settled the injured mare in one of them, making her as comfortable as possible with their limited supplies. "Will she recover?" Clara asked, concerned for the gentle horse that had carried her so far. "With rest, yes," Cole replied, "but not in time to help us." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We'll have to continue with just one horse. It'll slow us down considerably." Clara nodded, accepting this new challenge. "We'll manage." She glanced around the abandoned building. "Should we check the bunkhouse? There might be something useful." The bunkhouse portion was a single room with several collapsed bunks and a rusty pot-bellied stove. Dust lay thick on every surface, but the roof was intact, keeping out the elements. Cole checked it thoroughly before declaring it safe enough for the night. "Miners probably left in a hurry when the silver ran out," he commented, examining the few items left behind: a broken lantern, some rusted tools, a deck of cards missing several numbers. "Common story in these parts." They made a small fire in the stove, which miraculously still drew well enough to provide heat without filling the room with smoke. The warmth was welcome as the desert night quickly cooled to near freezing. Clara sat on a relatively stable bunk, wrapped in a blanket from Cole's pack, watching as he prepared a meager supper from their dwindling supplies. "How much farther to Las Cruces?" she asked. Cole consulted Tom's map by the light of a small candle he'd found in his saddlebags. "If we were still on schedule, 2 days, with 1 horse." He shook his head. "3, maybe 4. And that's assuming we don't run into any more trouble." Clara tried to hide her dismay. Every additional day on the trail meant increased risk of capture. "What happens when we reach Las Cruces?" "You mentioned friends who could help me get to Arizona territory." Cole nodded, passing her a tin plate with beans and a small portion of salt pork. "Catherine and James Montgomery. They run a small ranch outside Las Cruces. Catherine was a friend of Cora's. They'll help you get to Tucson if that's what you want." "And what about you?" Clara asked, the question that had been forming in her mind for days. "What will you do after you've delivered me safely?" Cole was silent for a moment, his face inscrutable in the flickering light. "I haven't thought that far ahead," he finally admitted. "Getting you to safety has been my only concern." Clara studied him, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. "You're planning to confront Wells, aren't you, once I'm safely away?" His silence was confirmation enough. "That's suicide," Clara said, setting down her plate. "Wells has men, money, influence. He'll kill you." "Maybe," Cole acknowledged. "Or maybe I'll finally get justice for Cora and Charlie." "At what cost?" Clara pressed. "Your life." Cole met her gaze steadily. "Some things are worth the risk, Clara." She wanted to argue further, to make him see the foolishness of throwing his life away in pursuit of revenge, but something in his expression stopped her. This wasn't a decision made lightly or in haste. This was the culmination of years of grief and anger, a path he'd set himself on long before he met her. They ate the remainder of their meal in silence, each lost in thought. After they finished, Cole took the plates outside to clean them with sand, returning a few minutes later with a troubled expression. "What is it?" Clara asked, recognizing the tension in his posture. "Probably nothing," he said, though his tone belied his words. "Thought I saw a light in the distance. Could be travelers, could be a search party." Clara's heart began to race. "What do we do?" "Stay put for now. We're well concealed here and the chimney smoke is minimal." He checked his revolver, ensuring it was loaded. "I'll keep watch. Try to get some sleep." Despite her fear, exhaustion eventually pulled Clara into a fitful sleep. She dreamed of being chased through endless canyons, Bernard Wells always just behind her, his laughter echoing off the stone walls. She awoke with a start to find early morning light filtering through the cracks in the bunkhouse walls. Cole was by the stove, heating coffee. He looked as though he hadn't slept at all, his eyes shadowed but alert. "Any sign of pursuit?" Clara asked, sitting up and pushing her tangled hair from her face. "No," Cole replied. "Whatever light I saw, it's gone now, but we should move on as soon as possible." They ate a hurried breakfast of hardtack softened in coffee, then gathered their belongings. The mare's leg looked slightly better, but Cole confirmed she still couldn't be ridden. They would have to continue with 1 horse, taking turns walking to spare the animal. "I'll walk first," Clara offered, lacing her boots tightly. "I'm rested and my legs could use the stretching." Cole looked as though he might argue but then nodded. "We'll switch every hour. The terrain's going to get rougher before it improves." He was right. As the day progressed, the trail led them deeper into a maze of canyons and arroyos, the ground alternating between loose sand that sucked at their feet and sharp rocks that threatened to cut through their boot soles. The heat built steadily. until by midday it felt like they were walking through an oven. When they paused to rest in the shadow of a towering red rock formation, Clara sank gratefully onto a boulder, her legs trembling with fatigue. Cole handed her the canteen, watching with concern as she drank deeply. "You're holding up well," he said, his tone approving. "Most city-raised women would have collapsed by now." Clara managed a weak smile. "I told you I'm not most women." She passed the canteen back to him. "Besides, I wasn't exactly city-raised. Aztec is hardly Santa Fe." "True enough," Cole agreed, taking a small sip before recapping the canteen carefully. Water was becoming a precious commodity. The next reliable source, according to Tom's map, was still several hours away. Clara studied Cole as he consulted the map again, noting the lines of fatigue etched around his eyes and mouth. He'd clearly slept little, if at all, the previous night. "You should ride next," she said. "You're exhausted." He shook his head. "I've gone longer without sleep. I'm fine." "Don't be stubborn," Clara insisted. "You're no good to either of us if you collapse from exhaustion. Ride for the next stretch, please." After a moment's hesitation, Cole nodded. "All right, but only for an hour." They continued their journey, with Cole reluctantly mounting while Clara led the horse. The canyon walls rose higher around them, providing some shade but also creating an unsettling sense of being trapped. The only sounds were their footsteps, the horse's occasional snort, and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. They had been traveling for perhaps 40 minutes when Cole suddenly stiffened in the saddle, his head turning sharply to the left. "What is it?" Clara whispered, her hand automatically moving toward the small revolver tucked in her belt. Cole dismounted in one fluid motion, pulling her behind a large boulder. "Riders," he murmured, "coming up the arroyo." Clara strained her ears and heard it then, the distant but unmistakable sound of horses approaching at a trot. "Wells's men. Can't be sure," Cole said, drawing his own revolver. "But we can't take chances. Stay down and stay quiet." They crouched behind the boulder, the horse standing quietly nearby, trained not to make noise. The approaching riders grew louder, and soon Clara could make out voices carried on the still air. "Waste of time," one man was saying. "They're probably halfway to Mexico by now." "Wells is paying $50 gold for information, double that if we bring her back ourselves," another voice replied. "Worth checking these old trails." Clara's blood ran cold. They were indeed Wells's men, and they were hunting specifically for her. Cole's hand found hers, squeezing gently in reassurance. The riders came into view, 3 men, dust-covered and trail-worn, their horses picking their way carefully through the rocky terrain. They passed within 30 feet of Clara and Cole's hiding place, close enough that Clara could see the glint of a deputy's badge on one man's chest. Her father had evidently convinced the law that she'd been kidnapped, not rescued. For a heart-stopping moment, one of the men looked directly toward their boulder. Clara held her breath, feeling Cole's grip tighten on his revolver. But the man's gaze moved on, and the riders continued up the arroyo, their voices fading into the distance. Cole waited a full 5 minutes after the sound of hoofbeats had disappeared before speaking. "That was too close," he said, his voice tight. "They're expanding their search area faster than I expected." Clara's legs felt weak as she stood. "They said Wells is offering money for information." $50 gold would be a fortune to most people around here. "Which means we can't trust anyone we might meet," Cole concluded grimly. "Not even ordinary travelers." He studied the sky, checking the sun's position. "We need to change course. They're searching these canyons systematically." He consulted Tom's map again, tracing potential routes with his finger. "There's an old Apache trail that cuts south through the mountains. It's unmarked on most maps, but Tom's noted it here. It's dangerous terrain, steep. Easy to get lost, but those men won't follow us there. How far out of our way will it take us? Clara asked. A day, maybe two. Cole folded the map, his expression resolute. But it's safer than continuing on this route. Clara nodded, trusting his judgment. Then that's what we'll do. They set off again, Cole leading them on a sharp turn to the east, toward a nearly invisible path that snaked up the side of a steep, rocky slope. The going was treacherous, with loose stones sliding beneath their feet and the horse struggling for purchase on the narrow trail. By sunset, they had climbed high enough to look back over the labyrinth of canyons they'd left behind. In the distance, Clara could see dust rising, more riders, combing the area they would have passed through had they continued on their original route. "You made the right choice," she said to Cole, who stood beside her, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. "They would have found us." "We're not in the clear yet," he warned. "This trail is harsh and we're running low on supplies, but at least we've bought some time." They made camp in a small hollow sheltered by pine trees, the altitude high enough that the vegetation had changed from desert scrub to sparse forest. The night air was cold enough to see their breath, and they huddled close to the small fire Cole had built in a rock-lined pit. "We should reach the southern end of the mountains by tomorrow evening," Cole said as they shared the last of their jerky and beans. "From there, it's another day to Las Cruces if we push hard." Clara nodded, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger in her stomach. The physical demands of their journey had depleted their food faster than anticipated, and they'd been eating less each day to stretch their supplies. "You think those men will give up the search?" she asked, warming her hands by the fire. Cole's expression was serious. "Eventually, yes. But not while the trail is still fresh, and Wells." He shook his head. "Wells won't give up easily. His pride won't allow it." Clara shivered, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "He's a monster," she whispered. "The things I've heard about how he treated his wives." "Don't think about that now," Cole said gently. "You're free of him. Focus on that." She nodded, trying to take comfort in his words. But as she settled onto her bedroll later, sleep eluding her despite her exhaustion, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Bernard Wells was still out there, his rage building with each day she remained beyond his reach. The next morning dawned clear and cold. They broke camp quickly, eating the last of their hardtack for breakfast. The horse seemed stronger after a night's rest, but they continued to take turns riding and walking to conserve its strength. The mountain trail was as difficult as Cole had warned, at times barely discernible, winding through dense pine forests and across rocky slopes where a misstep could mean a fatal fall. But Cole navigated with the confidence of someone born to the wilderness, finding landmarks where Clara saw only endless trees and stone. By mid-afternoon, they had begun their descent from the mountains, the trail widening slightly as it wound down toward more hospitable terrain. Clara was walking, leading the horse with Cole riding, when they rounded a bend and came upon an unexpected sight: a small cabin nestled in a clearing, with smoke rising from its stone chimney. Cole immediately signaled for a halt, dismounting silently. "Wait here," he murmured, drawing his revolver. "Could be a trapper or prospector. Could be trouble." He moved forward cautiously, staying within the tree line. Clara held her breath, hand on her own small revolver, ready to flee if necessary. But Cole's tense posture suddenly relaxed and he holstered his weapon. "Well, I'll be damned," he called back to her. "It's Thomas Red Wolf." A tall, broad-shouldered man with copper skin and long black hair streaked with gray emerged from the cabin, a rifle held casually in the crook of his arm. He wore a mixture of traditional Apache clothing and white man's attire: buckskin leggings with a faded blue cotton shirt. Cole Archer, the man said, his deep voice carrying across the clearing. The spirits must be bored to send you to my door again. Cole gestured for Clara to join him, which she did hesitantly, leading the horse forward. Clara, this is Thomas Red Wolf, former Army scout, current hermit, and the best tracker in the territory. Thomas, this is Clara Sinclair. The older man studied Clara with dark, intelligent eyes. The woman everyone is looking for, he stated matter-of-factly. Clara tensed, but Cole seemed unconcerned. News travels fast, he commented. Thomas Red Wolf nodded. Even to those who wish to avoid it, come inside. You look half-starved and your horse needs tending. The interior of the cabin was simple but comfortable, with a large fireplace, a sturdy table with benches, and shelves stocked with supplies. Thomas gestured for them to sit while he stirred a pot of stew hanging over the fire. You're running from Bernard Wells, he said without preamble, handing them each a bowl of fragrant stew. Dangerous man to cross. You know Wells? Cole asked, watching as Clara fell upon the food with barely restrained desperation. Thomas's expression darkened. I know of him. He tried to claim land that belongs to my people. When the army wouldn't back him, he hired men to drive off the Apache families living there. 3 died, including a child. Clara looked up from her bowl, horrified. That's awful. It is the way of some men, Thomas said simply. They take what they want and destroy what they cannot possess. His eyes met Clara's. You were wise to flee such a man. Thomas, Cole said, setting down his empty bowl, we're trying to reach Las Cruces. Wells has men searching all the main routes. You know a safe path. The older man considered this, then nodded slowly. There is a way. Little used, known mostly to my people. It will take you through the eastern foothills, away from the usual trails. He rose and moved to a crude map pinned to the wall, tracing a route with his finger. Here. It is longer but safer. Our supplies are depleted, Cole admitted, and we're down to 1 horse. Thomas waved a hand dismissively. I can provide food, water, and... He paused, considering. I have a horse, not young but strong and sure-footed. The woman can ride him. Clara looked at the man in surprise. That's incredibly generous, Mr. Red Wolf. I couldn't possibly, Thomas, he corrected her. And you can. I have little use for 2 horses these days. Besides, he added with a glint in his eye, anything that causes trouble for Bernard Wells is worth doing. They spent the night at Thomas's cabin, the first truly restful sleep Clara had experienced since their flight began. Thomas provided them with dried meat, cornmeal, coffee, and other supplies, enough to last them to Las Cruces with careful rationing. In the morning, he brought out the promised horse, an older buckskin gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. His name is Sundown, Thomas told Clara as she stroked the horse's nose. He has carried me many miles. He will do the same for you. Clara felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected kindness. Thank you, Thomas. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. The older man smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. Live well, be free, that is repayment enough. Before they departed, Thomas pulled Cole aside for a private conversation. Clara couldn't hear their words, but she saw Cole's expression grow serious, then resolute. When he returned to help her mount Sundown, there was a new determination in his eyes. What did he tell you? She asked as they rode away, Thomas raising a hand in farewell from his cabin door. Cole was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead. He said Wells has put a price on my head as well now, dead or alive. Clara's stomach clenched with fear. Because you helped me escape. That, and because he finally recognized my name. Cole's mouth set in a grim line. He remembers me from when I worked for him. Remembers Cora and what happened to Charlie. So now he wants revenge on you too, Clara whispered, the full danger of their situation becoming even clearer. Cole nodded. Thomas says Wells has sworn to hunt us both to the ends of the earth if necessary. This isn't just about a runaway bride anymore, Clara. It's personal for him now. Clara absorbed this information, fear and guilt warring in her chest. I'm sorry, she said finally. I've put you in terrible danger. Cole turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. You have nothing to apologize for. I chose this path knowing the risks. Wells was always going to be my enemy whether I helped you or not. They rode in silence for a time, following the trail Thomas had described. It was indeed less traveled, winding through stands of pinyon pine and juniper, occasionally offering glimpses of the vast desert stretching to the horizon. What will you do? Clara finally asked. After Las Cruces, I mean. Cole didn't immediately answer, his gaze scanning the terrain ahead. I don't know, he admitted. Can't run forever. Eventually I'll have to face Wells. That's what I'm afraid of, Clara said quietly. He won't fight fair, Cole, he never does. Neither do I, Cole replied with a grim smile. Not when it matters. They made good progress that day, the fresh supplies and second horse allowing them to cover more ground than before. By evening, they had descended fully from the mountains and entered rolling grassland dotted with mesquite and cactus. According to Thomas's directions, they were now less than a day's ride from Las Cruces. They made camp in a small arroyo, building a fire small enough to cook their meal without producing visible smoke. As they ate, Clara found herself studying Cole's face in the flickering light, memorizing each line and angle. The thought that she might soon be parting from him filled her with an unexpected sadness. Tell me about the Montgomerys, she said, breaking the companionable silence. The friends you mentioned in Las Cruces. Cole's expression softened. Good people. James was a cavalry officer before he was injured in a skirmish with Comanche raiders. Catherine was a schoolteacher back east before she came west. They have a small ranch, raise horses mainly. They took Cora in when she was sick, cared for her at the end. They sound wonderful, Clara said, but why would they help me? They don't know me. Catherine has a soft spot for women in difficult situations, Cole explained. She runs a sort of informal way station. Helps women who need to disappear from abusive husbands, troubled pasts, whatever the case may be. Gets them to safety, helps them start fresh. Clara nodded slowly, trying to imagine what such a fresh start might look like for her. And what skills do I have to offer in this new life? I can ride, shoot passably well, manage a household. But what else? How does one build a life from nothing? You're stronger than you know, Clara, Cole said quietly. I've seen that these past days you'll find your way. She wished she shared his confidence. The prospect of starting over alone in an unfamiliar place, with Bernard Wells potentially still hunting her, was daunting to say the least. What about you? She asked. Have you thought any more about what you'll do, after I mean? Cole poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. I've been drifting for years, he said finally. Taking whatever work came along, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. Maybe it's time to change that. What would you do if you weren't running or fighting? Clara asked, genuinely curious. This man who had risked everything to help her was still largely a mystery. He was quiet for a moment, considering. I've always liked working with horses, he said finally. Had a knack for the difficult ones, the ones others gave up on. A faint smile touched his lips. Cora used to say I understood them because I was just as stubborn. Clara smiled at that. She sounds like she was a remarkable person. She was, Cole agreed, the familiar shadow of grief passing across his features. She would have liked you. The simple statement touched Clara deeply. I wish I could have known her. They fell silent again, each lost in thought as the fire burned low. Clara found herself wondering what might have been had they met under different circumstances, not as rescuer and fugitive, but as two people free to explore the connection she increasingly felt between them. But such thoughts were foolish, she reminded herself. Their paths would soon diverge, Cole to his fate with Bernard Wells, she to whatever future awaited her in Arizona territory or beyond. Whatever this fragile thing growing between them was, it had no place in the harsh reality of their situation. Still, as she settled onto her bedroll that night, Clara found herself watching Cole as he took first watch, his profile sharp against the starlit sky. And for the first time since their flight began, she found herself praying not just for her own safety, but for his as well. The next day dawned clear and bright, with a hint of autumn crispness in the air despite the desert heat that would come later. They broke camp efficiently, now well practiced in the routine, and set off on the final leg of their journey to Las Cruces. Cole rode slightly ahead, constantly scanning the horizon for signs of danger. But the landscape remained peaceful, dotted only with the occasional jackrabbit or coyote slinking away at their approach. By midday, Clara could see signs of civilization in the distance, the faint outlines of buildings shimmering in the heat haze. Las Cruces, their destination for days, was finally within reach. "We'll skirt the town," Cole said as they paused to water the horses at a small stream. The Montgomery's ranch is to the southeast, about an hour's ride from the edge of town. Clara nodded, a strange mixture of relief and apprehension washing over her. Their journey was nearing its end, which meant her time with Cole was also drawing to a close. "Cole," she began, uncertain how to express the thoughts that had been swirling in her mind. "I want you to know a gunshot cracked the air, the bullet kicking up dust mere inches from Sundown's hooves. The horse reared in fright, nearly unseating Clara. Get down." Cole shouted, already drawing his revolver and scanning for the source of the shot. Clara slid from the saddle, crouching behind Sundown as a second shot rang out, this one splintering bark from a tree nearby. "There." Cole pointed to a ridge about 200 yards away, where Clara could just make out the glint of sunlight on a rifle barrel. "Ride hard for those rocks," he ordered, indicating a jumble of boulders about 50 yards away. "I'll cover you." Before she could protest, Cole fired 3 rapid shots toward the ridge, then slapped Sundown's rump to get the horse moving. Clara had no choice but to hold on as the horse galloped toward the shelter of the rocks. Behind her, she could hear the exchange of gunfire, Cole's revolver against what sounded like at least 2 rifles. Her heart hammered in her chest as she reached the rocks, dismounting and pulling Sundown into the shelter of the largest boulder. "Cole," she called, drawing her own small revolver with shaking hands. There was no answer except another burst of gunfire. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but Clara forced herself to think. Cole had taught her some basics of survival during their journey. She needed to assess the situation, find a defensible position, and if necessary, be prepared to continue alone. The thought of leaving Cole behind was unthinkable, but she made herself check her supplies anyway. She had water, some food, the map to the Montgomery's ranch, if the worst happened. Another volley of gunfire erupted, closer this time. Clara risked a glance around the edge of the boulder and saw Cole making a dash toward her position, firing behind him as he ran. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by fresh fear as she saw dust kick up at his feet from bullets narrowly missing him. "How many?" she asked as he dove behind the boulder beside her, breathing hard. "3, he gasped, reloading his revolver. "Wells's men by the looks of them. Must have been watching the approaches to town." "What do we do?" Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. Cole's eyes met hers, and in them she saw a calculation being made. "You need to go," he said finally. "Take Sundown and ride for the Montgomery's ranch. I'll hold them off here." "No," Clara said immediately, the word coming out stronger than she intended. "I'm not leaving you here to die." "Clara, no," she repeated, cutting him off. "We've come this far together. We'll finish it together." A bullet ricocheted off the boulder, sending stone chips flying. Cole ducked instinctively, then gave her a look that mingled frustration and admiration. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he muttered. "Fine, but we need a plan that doesn't end with both of us dead." Clara nodded, forcing her racing thoughts to calm. "Could we circle around?" "Use the terrain to our advantage." Cole considered this, peering cautiously around the edge of the boulder. "Maybe. There's a ravine to our left. If we could reach it without being seen, we might be able to double back and come up behind them." Another burst of gunfire peppered their position. "They're moving closer," Cole observed grimly. "We need to act now." He pointed to a smaller cluster of rocks about 20 yards away in the direction of the ravine. "I'll lay down covering fire. You make for those rocks. When you're safe, signal me and I'll follow." "Ready." Clara's mouth was dry with fear, but she nodded. "Ready." Cole checked his revolver one last time, then positioned himself at the edge of the boulder. "On my mark. 1, 2, 3, he leaned out, firing rapidly toward the ridge where their attackers were positioned. Clara took a deep breath and ran, keeping low, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the gunmen would hear it. The distance to the rocks seemed to stretch endlessly, each step feeling as though she were running through molasses. Finally, she reached the shelter of the smaller boulders, pressing herself against the cool stone as bullets whined overhead. She waved to Cole, signaling her safe arrival. Now it was his turn. Clara watched, breath held as Cole made his dash across the open ground. He was halfway to her position when a bullet caught him, spinning him around. He stumbled but kept moving, reaching the rocks and collapsing beside her. "Cole," Clara gasped, seeing blood spreading across his left shoulder. "You're hit." "It's not bad," he grimaced, though his face had gone pale. "Through and through. Help me bind it." With shaking hands, Clara tore a strip from her petticoat and wrapped it tightly around Cole's shoulder, stemming the flow of blood. The white fabric quickly turned crimson, but the bleeding slowed. "Can you still shoot?" she asked, painfully aware that their situation had just become even more desperate. Cole flexed his hand, wincing. "Right arm's fine, but I've only got 6 bullets left. Make that count against 3 armed men." Clara checked her own revolver. "I have 5. A grim smile touched Cole's lips. "Better odds than I thought then." More gunfire struck their position, closer now. The attackers were definitely advancing, using the terrain for cover as they closed in. "The ravine," Cole said, nodding toward a depression in the ground about 15 yards away. "It's our only chance." "We go together this time." Clara helped Cole to his feet, supporting him as best she could. Blood had already soaked through the makeshift bandage, but his eyes were clear and determined. "On 3, he said, and Clara nodded. They ran together, Cole's arm around her shoulders, her arm around his waist. Bullets kicked up dust at their heels as they slid into the ravine, tumbling down its steep side to land in a heap at the bottom. For a moment they lay there, catching their breath. The ravine was about 6 feet deep, offering temporary shelter from the gunfire above. But Clara knew it was only a matter of time before their pursuers found them. "Now what?" she whispered, looking to Cole for guidance. He was leaning against the ravine wall, his face ashen but his eyes still alert. "We follow the ravine east," he said. "It should lead toward that stand of cottonwoods we passed earlier. If we can reach those, we might be able to lose them in the vegetation." Clara nodded, helping Cole to his feet once more. Together, they began making their way along the bottom of the ravine, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. Above them, they could hear the voices of their pursuers, searching for signs of where they had gone. They had covered perhaps 100 yards when the ravine began to shallow out, offering less protection with each step. Soon, they would be exposed again. "There they are," a voice shouted from behind them. Gunfire erupted, bullets thudding into the dirt around them. Cole pushed Clara ahead of him. "Run," he ordered, turning to return fire with his remaining bullets. Clara hesitated only a moment before obeying, scrambling up the now gentle slope of the ravine toward the distant cottonwoods. Behind her, she could hear the exchange of gunfire, Cole's revolver against the rifles of their pursuers. Then, suddenly, silence. She turned, her heart in her throat, to see Cole standing in the ravine, his empty revolver hanging at his side. 3 men were approaching him cautiously, rifles trained on his chest. Without thinking, Clara raised her own revolver, taking careful aim as Cole had taught her. 5 bullets, 3 men. She had to make them count. She squeezed the trigger, the recoil jarring her arm. One of the men fell, clutching his leg. The others immediately dove for cover, giving Cole the moment he needed to scramble up the ravine toward her. "Run," he gasped as he reached her, blood now soaking his entire left side. "They'll be right behind us." Together they staggered toward the cottonwoods, every step an agony for Cole. Behind them, Clara could hear their pursuers recovering, preparing to give chase. They weren't going to make it. And then, like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to utter, the thunder of hoofbeats reached her ears. Riders were approaching from the direction of Las Cruces, a group of perhaps 5 or 6 men moving fast. "Cole," she said urgently. "Look." He raised his head, squinting at the approaching riders. For a moment, his expression was wary these could be more of Wells's men after all. But then, unexpectedly, he began to laugh, the sound weak but genuinely amused. "What is it?" Clara asked, confused by his reaction. "Who are they? The cavalry?" Cole managed between chuckles. "Or the next best thing? That's James Montgomery leading them." As the riders drew closer, Clara could make out a tall man with a cavalry hat and a distinctive red beard at their head. Behind him rode a diverse group, a mix of cowboys, townsmen, and what appeared to be a deputy sheriff. Their pursuers had evidently seen the newcomers as well, for they were now retreating, scrambling back toward their horses hidden somewhere on the ridge. The riders reached them moments later, James Montgomery reining in his horse sharply beside them. "Cole Archer," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Always in the middle of trouble, aren't you?" Despite his pallor and obvious pain, Cole managed a grin. "You know me, James, can't seem to avoid it." Montgomery dismounted, his eyes taking in Cole's blood-soaked shirt and Clara's disheveled appearance. "Wells's men, I take it." When Cole nodded, Montgomery turned to the deputy in his group. "Peterson, take 2 men and go after them. I want them arrested for attempted murder." As the deputy and 2 others rode off in pursuit, Montgomery helped Cole onto his own horse. "You look like you could use a doctor, old friend." "What I could use," Cole replied weakly, "is to get Miss Sinclair safely to your ranch. Catherine's expecting her." Montgomery turned to Clara, his expression softening. "You must be the young lady Cole mentioned in his telegram. My wife has been preparing for your arrival." Clara blinked in surprise. "Telegram?" Cole had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Sent it from Thomas Red Wolf's cabin. He has a telegraph line, part of his work with the Army years ago. Thought it might be wise to let the Montgomerys know we were coming." "And a good thing he did," Montgomery added, helping Clara onto a horse one of his men offered. "Wells has been spreading all manner of tales about you, too. Says you stole valuable property and that Cole kidnapped you." Clara's indignation flared. "That's absurd. I went willingly. More than willingly." "So Cole's telegram indicated," Montgomery said with a nod. Catherine was quite moved by your situation. She's been making preparations for your arrival ever since. As they rode toward Las Cruces, Cole's strength began to fail, the blood loss from his wound taking its toll. By the time they reached the Montgomery ranch, a sprawling adobe structure surrounded by corrals and outbuildings, he was barely conscious, slumped forward in the saddle. Catherine Montgomery met them in the yard, a tall, slender woman with copper-colored hair streaked with gray. Her expression shifted from welcome to alarm as she took in Cole's condition. "Get him inside," she ordered, already rolling up her sleeves. "James, fetch my medical kit. Miss Sinclair, come with me." Clara found herself ushered into a clean, comfortable bedroom where Cole was laid on a bed. Catherine worked efficiently, cutting away his bloodied shirt to reveal the bullet wound beneath. "Not as bad as it looks," she pronounced after examining it. "The bullet went through cleanly. No major vessels hit or he'd have bled out by now." She looked at Clara. "You bound this?" Clara nodded. "I used what I had." "You likely saved his life," Catherine said, already cleaning the wound with practiced movements. "Many would have panicked." "I was terrified," Clara admitted, "but I couldn't let him die, not after everything he's done for me." Catherine's keen eyes studied her face for a moment before returning to her work. "James, we'll need hot water and the whiskey from your study. Miss Sinclair, if you're staying, I'll need you to hold him down. This will hurt." Clara didn't hesitate, moving to the head of the bed and placing her hands firmly on Cole's good shoulder and chest. He was conscious again, his eyes foggy with pain but aware. "Clara," he murmured, reaching for her hand. She took it, squeezing gently. "I'm here. You're safe now, we both are." As Catherine prepared to clean and stitch the wound, Cole's eyes held Clara's. "I didn't bring you this far to lose you now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Clara could respond, Catherine began her work and Cole's body arched in pain. Clara held him steady, whispering soothing words as Catherine worked efficiently to clean and close the wound. Throughout the ordeal, Cole never cried out, though sweat beaded on his forehead and his jaw clenched so tightly Clara feared his teeth might crack. Finally, it was done. Catherine bandaged the wound and administered a dose of laudanum that soon had Cole drifting into an uneasy sleep. "He'll recover," Catherine assured Clara as they left the room. "Cole Archer is too stubborn to die from a single bullet wound." Clara smiled weakly, suddenly aware of her own exhaustion. The events of the day, the gunfight, the narrow escape, the emotional strain of seeing Cole wounded crashed over her like a wave. Catherine seemed to notice, for her expression softened. "You look dead on your feet, child. Let me show you to your room. A bath and clean clothes will be waiting for you." The room Catherine led her to was small but pleasant, with a window overlooking a garden where roses still bloomed despite the advancing season. A copper tub steamed in the center of the room and clean clothes were laid out on the bed. "Rest," Catherine said kindly. "We'll talk in the morning. You're safe here." For the first time since her flight from Aztec, Clara truly believed those words. She was safe. She was free. As she sank into the warm bath, tears of relief and exhaustion finally came, washing away the dust and fear of the past days. Later, clean and dressed in a borrowed nightgown, Clara stood at the window of her room, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. So much had changed in so little time. A week ago, she had been resigned to a life of misery as Bernard Wells's wife. Now she was free, but at what cost? Cole had nearly died today, and Bernard Wells, by all accounts, was still hunting them both. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Catherine stood there, holding a tray with soup and bread. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, setting the tray on a small table, "and perhaps in need of company." Clara smiled gratefully. "Thank you for everything. Catherine waved away her thanks. "Cole Archer is like family to us. Any friend of his is welcome here." She settled into a chair, her keen eyes studying Clara. "He told us some of your story in his telegram, an arranged marriage to Bernard Wells. I can understand why you fled." "My father owed him money," Clara explained, sitting down and accepting the bowl of soup Catherine offered. "A lot of money. The marriage was to settle the debt." Catherine's expression hardened, as if a woman were chattel to be traded. Barbaric. "My father didn't see it that way," Clara said quietly. "He thought he was securing my future. Bernard Wells is wealthy, influential." "And cruel," Catherine finished for her. "His reputation is well known even here in Las Cruces." Clara nodded, taking a spoonful of soup. It was rich and flavorful, the first proper meal she'd had in days. "Cole says you help women in situations like mine." "I do what I can," Catherine acknowledged. "There are too many women trapped in impossible circumstances, abusive husbands, forced marriages, desperate poverty. I help them find new starts, new identities if necessary." "Is that what you'll do for me?" Clara asked, both hopeful and apprehensive. Catherine studied her thoughtfully. "If that's what you want. I have connections in Tucson in California, places where Bernard Wells's influence doesn't reach." The thought of starting over so far away, alone, filled Clara with a strange sadness. "And Cole?" she asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind. "What will happen to him?" Catherine's expression softened. "That depends largely on Cole himself, and perhaps on you, on me." Clara repeated, confused. "I've known Cole Archer for many years," Catherine said, her voice gentle. "I watched him raise his sister, saw his grief when she died. In all that time, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We've been through a lot together in a short time. Natural that we'd form a bond." Catherine smiled knowingly. "Of course, just a bond." She rose, patting Clara's hand. "Get some rest, dear. Things often become clearer in the morning light." After Catherine left, Clara finished her soup, her mind turning over the older woman's words. Was it possible that Cole felt something more for her than the responsibility of a rescuer for someone in his care? And what of her own feelings, the ones she'd been trying to ignore since they'd first begun their journey? Sleep claimed her before she could find answers to these questions, her exhausted body finally surrendering to rest in the knowledge that, for tonight at least, she was safe. She awoke to sunlight streaming through the window and the distant sounds of a ranch coming to life, horses nickering, men calling to one another, the clang of metal on metal from what must be a blacksmith's forge. For a moment, disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings, Clara tensed. Then memory returned, and with it relief. She was at the Montgomery ranch. She was safe. Her first thought was of Cole. Dressing quickly in the clothes Catherine had provided, a simple but well-made dress of blue cotton, Clara made her way to the room where Cole had been treated the night before. She found him awake, propped up on pillows, his shoulder heavily bandaged but his color much improved. He was arguing good-naturedly with James Montgomery. "I'm telling you I can ride by tomorrow," Cole was saying as Clara entered. "The wound's not that bad. And I'm telling you, Catherine will tie you to that bed herself if you try," James replied, his tone exasperated but fond. He noticed Clara in the doorway and smiled. "Perhaps Miss Sinclair can talk some sense into you since you won't listen to me." Cole turned, his expression softening as he saw her. "Clara, you're looking well. Better than you," she replied, moving to his bedside. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot," he said with a wry smile. "But I'll live thanks to your quick thinking yesterday." James excused himself, leaving them alone. Clara sat in the chair beside the bed, suddenly unsure what to say now that they were no longer running for their lives. "Catherine tells me you'll make a full recovery," she finally said. But that you need rest, Cole grimaced. I've had worse injuries breaking horses. His eyes searched her face. How are you? Really? Safe, Clara replied simply. Thanks to you. A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but charged with things unsaid. Finally, Cole spoke again. Catherine mentioned she's offered to help you get to Tucson or California. Clara nodded. She has. Is that what you want? The question hung in the air, weighted with meaning beyond the simple words. Clara considered it carefully before answering. I want to be free, she said finally. Free to make my own choices, live my own life. But she hesitated, then continued more softly. But I've realized something these past days. Freedom means little if you're alone. Cole's eyes never left her face. You wouldn't be alone forever. You'd make friends, build a new life. Perhaps. Clara gathered her courage and asked the question that had been burning in her mind. What about you, Cole? What will you do now? He was silent for a long moment, his gaze shifting to the window where sunlight danced across the glass. I've been running for a long time, he said finally. From memories, from grief, from myself in some ways, helping you escape. It changed something in me. How? Clara asked, her heart beating faster. Cole's eyes returned to hers, their amber depth serious. It reminded me that there are things worth fighting for, worth staying for. Before Clara could respond, a commotion erupted outside, voices raised in alarm, the sound of horses approaching at speed. James Montgomery burst into the room, his expression grave. Cole, we have trouble. Bernard Wells just rode onto my property with 6 armed men, demanding we turn over Miss Sinclair. Cole was out of bed in an instant, wincing as the movement jarred his wounded shoulder. Where's my gun? You're in no condition to fight, James protested. I'm in no condition to let Wells take Clara, Cole countered, reaching for his shirt draped over a chair. Clara stood, her mind racing. This has to end, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I can't keep running forever, and neither can you. Cole paused in the act of buttoning his shirt, his eyes meeting hers. What are you suggesting? I'll speak to him, Clara said, the idea forming as she spoke, face to face, with witnesses present. Absolutely not, Cole said immediately. Wells is dangerous, unpredictable. He's also proud, Clara countered. Too proud to harm me in front of witnesses. It would destroy the story he's been telling that I was kidnapped against my will. James nodded slowly. She has a point, Cole, and my men are armed. Wells wouldn't dare try anything violent with so many witnesses. Cole still looked unconvinced, but Clara stepped forward, placing a hand on his good arm. Trust me, Cole. I'm not the same frightened girl who fled Aztec a week ago. You helped me find my courage. Let me use it. After a long moment, Cole nodded reluctantly. All right. But I'll be right beside you. James led them to the front porch of the ranch house, where Bernard Wells and his men sat mounted in the yard. Clara's breath caught at the sight of the man she'd been promised to tall, imposing in his expensive suit, his silver hair and beard neatly trimmed. But it was his eyes that had always frightened her most, cold blue, calculating, with no warmth or compassion. Those eyes fixed on her now as she stepped onto the porch, Cole and the Montgomerys flanking her. Wells's expression shifted from anger to something like triumph. There she is, he called, his voice carrying across the yard. My runaway bride. His gaze shifted to Cole, hardening, and the thief who stole her. Clara stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice clear. No one stole me, Mr. Wells. I left of my own free will. Wells's smile was cold. You were confused, manipulated by this man. He nodded toward Cole. Your father is sick with worry. He sent me to bring you home. My father sold me to you to clear his debts, Clara replied, loud enough for all to hear. I am not property to be traded, Mr. Wells. I will not marry you, not now, not ever." A murmur ran through the gathered ranch hands and Wells's men alike. The public rejection clearly angered Wells, a flush creeping up his neck. "You are promised to me," he said, his voice hardening. "Your father signed a contract." "My father had no right to sign away my life," Clara replied steadily. "I am of age. I make my own choices." Wells's eyes narrowed. "You have nothing without me. No money, no home, no protection." "She has all of those things here," Catherine Montgomery spoke up, moving to stand beside Clara. "And the law is on her side, Mr. Wells. No court would enforce a marriage contract against the will of the woman involved." Wells's gaze swept over the assembled group, clearly assessing his options. His men shifted uneasily, outnumbered by the ranch hands who had gathered, many openly carrying weapons. "This isn't just about a marriage contract," Wells said, changing tactics. "This man," he pointed to Cole, "interfered in a legal agreement between gentlemen. He stole what was rightfully mine." "Clara was never yours," Cole said, his voice deadly quiet as he stepped forward. "Just like Cora was never yours, no matter how you tried to claim her." Wells went still, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Archer," he said slowly. "Cole Archer, the boy who worked my North Range." A cruel smile spread across his face. "The one with the pretty sister." Cole's hand moved to his gun, but Clara caught his arm, stopping him. "Don't," she whispered. "That's what he wants." James Montgomery stepped forward then, his voice carrying authority from his years as a cavalry officer. "Mr. Wells, you are trespassing on my property. Miss Sinclair has made her wishes clear. I suggest you leave peacefully, or I will be forced to involve the law." For a tense moment, it seemed Wells might refuse. His hand hovered near his own weapon and his men looked to him for direction. But then, unexpectedly, he laughed a sound devoid of humor. "The law," he repeated, shaking his head. "Do you know how many lawmen I have in my pocket, Montgomery? This isn't over, not by a long shot." He turned his cold gaze back to Clara. "You've made an enemy today, girl. Both of you have. Remember that." With that, he wheeled his horse around and rode out, his men following. The gathered ranch hands began to disperse, talking in low voices about what they'd witnessed. Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her knees suddenly weak. Cole's arm came around her waist, supporting her. "You were magnificent," he murmured, "braver than anyone I've ever known." Catherine approached, her expression concerned. "Come inside, both of you. This isn't finished yet, I'm afraid." In the Montgomerys' parlor, James poured whiskey for everyone, including Clara, who accepted it gratefully. The liquor burned going down but steadied her nerves. "Wells won't give up easily," James said, voicing what they all knew. "He's not a man who accepts defeat." "What can he do?" Clara asked. "If he can't force me to marry him, he can make life very difficult for you," Catherine interrupted gently. "For both of you. His influence extends throughout the territory, finding work, a place to live. He could ensure doors are closed to you wherever you go." "Unless you go beyond his reach," James added. "California, perhaps, or north to Colorado." Cole had been silent, staring into his whiskey glass. Now he looked up, his expression resolved. "Running isn't the answer, it never was." "What are you suggesting?" James asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "I'm suggesting we stop running and face this head-on." Cole set down his glass. "Wells has been terrorizing this territory for years. Not just Clara, not just Cora. How many others have suffered because no one would stand against him?" "You're talking about challenging one of the most powerful men in New Mexico," Catherine pointed out. "A man with money, connections, hired guns." "Yes," Cole agreed simply. "I am." Clara looked at him, understanding dawning. "This was never just about helping me escape, was it?" "You always intended to confront him." Cole met her gaze steadily. I intended to help you first. What came after, I wasn't sure, but seeing him today, hearing him speak your name, knowing what he would have done to you." His jaw tightened. "I can't walk away, Clara, not anymore." A strange calm settled over Clara as the pieces fell into place. The past week had been leading to this moment, this choice. She could run, start a new life far away from Bernard Wells and his influence, or she could stand and fight alongside this man who had risked everything for her. "Then we face him together," she said, her decision made, "because I can't walk away either." Cole's expression was a mixture of surprise, admiration, and something deeper that made her heart race. "Clara, I can't ask you to. You didn't ask," she interrupted. "I'm choosing. Just as I chose to leave with you that night in Aztec." She turned to the Montgomerys. "Is there a way to fight someone like Wells and win?" James and Catherine exchanged looks. "Perhaps," James said slowly. "Wells has enemies, people he's wronged over the years. The Apache families he drove off their land. Small ranchers he's forced out of business, if they could be brought together, given a voice. And there's the matter of Charlie's murder," Catherine added. "The case was dismissed, but if new evidence came to light or witnesses stepped forward—" "Thomas Red Wolf was there that night," Cole said, straightening. "He saw what happened, but he didn't come forward because he knew no one would take an Apache's word over Wells's." "Times are changing," James said thoughtfully. "The territorial governor is under pressure from Washington to clean up corruption. A case like this, with multiple witnesses and victims coming forward, it could work." Hope, tentative but real, began to bloom in Clara's chest. "So we gather evidence, find witnesses, build a case against Wells." "It won't be easy," Catherine warned, "and it will be dangerous. Wells will fight back." "We know," Cole said, his eyes meeting Clara's, "but some things are worth the risk." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. James Montgomery, with his military connections and standing in the community, took the lead in building a legal case against Bernard Wells. Thomas Red Wolf was brought to Las Cruces to give his account of Charlie's murder, his testimony written down by a sympathetic judge. Other witnesses came forward as well, former employees of Wells's ranch who had seen his cruelty firsthand, small landowners he had threatened or cheated, even the doctor who had treated Wells's first wife for accidents that were clearly beatings. Cole, despite his injury, rode with James to gather these testimonies, sometimes being gone for days at a time. Clara worked with Catherine, writing letters to officials in Santa Fe and even Washington, detailing the pattern of corruption and violence that had allowed Wells to operate with impunity for so long. During this time, Clara and Cole saw each other only in passing, exchanging brief words or glances laden with meaning, but never finding the time or privacy to speak of what lay between them. The unspoken feelings grew stronger in the silence, like plants reaching toward sunlight. It was nearly a month after their arrival at the Montgomery Ranch when word came that the territorial governor had appointed a special investigator to look into the charges against Bernard Wells. The news was delivered by a rider who arrived at dusk, just as Clara was helping Catherine prepare dinner. James called them all into the parlor to hear the messenger's report. "The investigator will be arriving in Las Cruces next week," the young man said. "He's bringing federal marshals with him. The governor wants this handled properly, with no interference from local authorities who might be in Wells's pocket." "That's excellent news," James said, clapping the messenger on the shoulder. "When does the governor want our witnesses assembled?" "That's the thing, sir," the messenger replied, his expression growing serious. "Word has already leaked out. Wells knows the investigation is coming. He's been seen gathering his men, and there's talk he might try to eliminate witnesses before the investigator arrives." A heavy silence fell over the room. Cole, who had been standing by the window, turned to face them. "Then we need to move now, get our witnesses someplace safe until the marshals arrive." "The ranch can accommodate some," James said, "but not all." "I know a place," Cole said after a moment's thought. "Thomas Red Wolf's cabin. It's remote, defensible. We could move the most vulnerable witnesses there." Plans were quickly made. Cole, despite Catherine's protests that his shoulder had not fully healed, would leave immediately with two of James's most trusted ranch hands to escort Thomas Red Wolf and 3 other key witnesses to the remote cabin. James would remain at the ranch with the rest, maintaining a visible presence to discourage any direct attack by Wells's men. As Cole prepared to leave, gathering supplies and checking weapons, Clara found him alone in the stable, saddling his horse. "You shouldn't be riding yet," she said, watching as he winced while tightening the cinch. "Your shoulder will heal," he finished for her, turning to face her. "This is more important." Clara stepped closer, her heart pounding. "Be careful," she said softly. "Wells is desperate now." "That makes him more dangerous than ever." Cole's expression softened as he looked at her. "I will. I have something to come back for now." The words hung between them, full of promise. Clara took another step forward, eliminating the distance between them. "Cole," he silenced her with a gentle finger against her lips, then replaced it with his mouth, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Clara responded instantly, her arms going around his neck as she returned the kiss with all the emotion she'd been holding back for weeks. When they finally broke apart, Cole rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "I've been wanting to do that since the second day on the trail," he admitted. Clara smiled, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "What took you so long?" "Fear," he said honestly. "Not of bullets or Bernard Wells, but of feeling something I thought I'd never feel again after losing Cora and Charlie. Something I might lose again." "I'm not going anywhere," Clara promised. "When this is over, when Wells is brought to justice, we'll have time to explore whatever this is between us." Cole nodded, reluctantly stepping back. 3 days, he said. "I'll be back in 3 days with the witnesses. Then we'll end this once and for all." Clara watched him ride out with the ranch hands, her heart both full and anxious. So much had changed since that night she'd fled Aztec in her wedding dress. She had changed, transformed from a woman resigned to her fate to one determined to shape her own destiny. The next 2 days passed in tense anticipation. More witnesses arrived at the ranch, each with their own story of Wells's cruelty or corruption. Clara listened to them all, recording their testimonies for the investigator, finding her own anger growing with each new account. On the evening of the second day, as she sat on the porch watching the sunset and waiting for any sign of Cole's return, Catherine joined her, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the cooling air. "He'll be back tomorrow," Catherine said, correctly interpreting Clara's vigilant gaze toward the road. "I know," Clara replied. "I just can't help worrying." Catherine smiled knowingly. "Love tends to make us anxious for those who hold our hearts." Clara looked at the older woman, not bothering to deny the observation. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to anyone with eyes," Catherine replied with gentle humor. Then more seriously, "Cole has been alone for a long time. After Cora died, he closed himself off, became the drifter you first met. I never thought I'd see him care for someone again the way he cares for you." "I never thought I'd feel this way about anyone," Clara admitted. "Growing up, marriage was always presented to me as a practical arrangement, a way to secure my future. The idea of marrying for love seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford." She shook her head, smiling ruefully. "And now here I am, having run away from one marriage only to find myself contemplating another." "Has he asked you?" Catherine inquired. "Not in words," Clara said, But I think we both know what we want. Once this is over." Catherine nodded, understanding. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell, each lost in her own thoughts. It was nearly midnight when Clara finally retired to her room, though sleep eluded her. Tomorrow Cole would return, and they would move forward with their plan to bring Wells to justice. Tomorrow, perhaps, they could begin to imagine a future together. But tomorrow brought only more waiting, and by nightfall, there was still no sign of Cole and the witnesses. James sent a rider to scout the trail toward Thomas Red Wolf's cabin, but the man returned after dark, reporting no sign of Cole's group. Could they have taken a different route? Clara asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice. Possible, James acknowledged, though his expression was grave. But unlikely. Cole knows these trails as well as anyone. He would have sent word if their plans changed. "Something's wrong," Catherine said, voicing what they all feared. "James, we need to send a search party at first light." Clara barely slept that night, her mind conjuring increasingly terrible scenarios. Had Wells's men found them? Was Cole lying wounded somewhere, or worse? The thought was unbearable. At dawn, she was dressed and waiting as James organized a search party. "I'm coming with you," she announced, her tone brooking no argument. James studied her determined face for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, but stay close to me at all times." They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern mountains. A group of 6 riders headed toward Thomas Red Wolf's cabin. The journey was tense, every rider scanning the landscape for signs of trouble. They had been riding for perhaps 3 hours when one of the ranch hands called out, pointing to something in the distance. "Smoke," he shouted, "coming from the direction of the cabin." They spurred their horses forward, covering the remaining distance at a gallop. As they crested a rise, Clara's heart sank. Thomas Red Wolf's cabin was ablaze, flames consuming the wooden structure as black smoke billowed into the clear morning sky. "No," she whispered, horror washing over her. "Please, no." James and his men approached cautiously, weapons drawn, searching for any sign of attackers still in the area. But the clearing around the burning cabin was deserted, save for 3 bodies lying motionless on the ground. Clara dismounted, her legs shaking as she followed James toward the bodies. "Please don't let one of them be Cole," she prayed silently. "Please." The first body was that of one of James's ranch hands, shot multiple times. The second was a witness they had planned to meet, an elderly shopkeeper who had refused to pay Wells's protection fees. The third was Thomas Red Wolf himself, his weathered face peaceful in death despite the bullet wound in his chest. "Cole," Clara called, scanning the clearing desperately. "Cole," James put a hand on her shoulder. "He's not here, Clara." "Neither are the other witnesses or Miguel, my other ranch hand." Hope flared briefly. Then they might have escaped, before the attack. "Possibly," James said, though his tone was guarded, "or they may have been taken. Look." He pointed to tracks in the dirt, multiple horses, some dragging something heavy. "Looks like they were headed east, toward Wells's main ranch." Clara's mind raced. If Cole and the others had been captured rather than killed outright, it meant Wells wanted something from them. Information, perhaps, or a public recanting of their testimonies. Either way, it meant they might still be alive. "We have to go after them," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. James shook his head. "Not like this. We're outnumbered and Wells's ranch is like a fortress. We need help." He turned to one of his men. "Ride back to Las Cruces as fast as you can. Find the sheriff. Tell him what's happened here, and send a telegram to the territorial capital. The governor needs to know his witnesses are being murdered." The rider nodded and galloped off. James turned back to Clara, his expression grave but determined. We'll get Cole back, Clara. I promise you that. They buried the dead as best they could, then returned to the Montgomery ranch with the grim news. Catherine took one look at Clara's face and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "He's alive," Clara whispered, clinging to the older woman. "He has to be." "Cole Archer is the most stubborn man I've ever known," Catherine replied, her own voice thick with emotion. "If anyone can survive Bernard Wells, it's him." The next few hours were agonizing. Clara paced the ranch house, unable to sit still, her mind filled with images of Cole in Wells's hands. She had heard the stories of what the man was capable of when crossed: beatings, torture, slow deaths designed to send a message to others who might defy him. It was nearly sunset when the rider they had sent to Las Cruces returned, bringing unexpected news. "The federal marshals are already in town," he reported, accepting a glass of water from Catherine. "Arrived this morning, a day ahead of schedule. The sheriff's gathered a posse and they're planning to ride for Wells's ranch at dawn." "Dawn?" Clara repeated, dismayed. "That's hours away. Cole might not have hours." "The marshals want to do this legally," the rider explained. "They're drawing up warrants, gathering men. They want to do this right, make sure the charges stick." James nodded, understanding, though his expression was troubled. "They're right to be cautious. Wells has escaped justice before through legal technicalities." "But Cole doesn't have time for caution," Clara insisted, her fear giving way to anger. "None of them do." Catherine touched her arm gently. "Clara, I know you're frightened for him. We all are. But rushing in without proper support could make things worse." Clara knew they were right, but the thought of Cole enduring even one more hour in Wells's hands was unbearable. As the others continued discussing plans for the morning, an idea began to form in her mind, reckless perhaps, but possibly their only chance. She waited until after dinner, when the house had grown quiet. James and Catherine had retired to their room, and the ranch hands were in their bunkhouse. Moving silently, Clara dressed in the clothes she had worn during their flight from Aztec, practical riding clothes that would allow her to move freely. In the stable, she saddled Sundown, the horse Thomas Red Wolf had given her. The gelding seemed to sense the importance of their mission, standing quietly as she tightened the cinch and secured her few supplies. "Going somewhere?" The voice made her jump. She turned to find Catherine standing in the stable doorway, a shawl wrapped around her nightgown. "I have to try," Clara said simply. "I can't wait until dawn." Catherine studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I thought you might do something like this." She stepped forward, holding out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Take this. Food, water, and a better weapon than that little revolver you've been carrying." Clara accepted the bundle, surprised and touched by the older woman's understanding. "You're not going to try to stop me? Would it work if I did?" Catherine asked with a small smile. When Clara shook her head, Catherine continued, "I was young and in love once too. I know what it means to be willing to risk everything for the person who holds your heart." She helped Clara secure the bundle to her saddle, then stepped back. "Wells's ranch is about 15 miles northeast of here. There's a back approach through the hills that his men don't patrol as heavily. James showed it to Cole once, years ago, when they were mapping the territory for the army." "Thank you," Clara said, embracing the older woman, "for understanding." "Just promise me you'll be careful," Catherine replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I've grown rather fond of you, Clara Sinclair. I'd like to see you live long enough to become Clara Archer." Clara blushed at the implication but didn't deny it. "I'll be careful. And I'll bring him back." She mounted Sundown and rode out into the night, guided by the stars and a determination that burned brighter than fear. The route Catherine had described took her through rolling hills, covered with scrub and cacti. the terrain growing more rugged as she approached Wells's ranch. By midnight, she could see lights in the distance, the main house and outbuildings of the largest ranch in the territory. Clara dismounted, leading Sundown the rest of the way on foot to avoid being heard. As she drew closer, she could make out the layout of the ranch, a large main house surrounded by barns, corrals, and bunkhouses for the ranch hands. But where would they be keeping Cole and the others? The main house seemed unlikely, too many windows, too easy to escape. One of the outbuildings, then. Clara studied the property carefully, noting the patterns of the guards patrolling the perimeter. There were more men than usual, she observed, confirming her suspicion that something important or someone was being kept secure. Her attention was drawn to a small stone building set apart from the others. Unlike the barns and bunkhouses, which showed lights in their windows, this building was dark. Yet 2 armed men stood outside its single door guarding something or someone. Clara's heart raced. That had to be where they were keeping the prisoners. But how to get past the guards? A direct approach was suicide. She needed a distraction. Fortune favored her in the form of a stack of hay bales near one of the far corrals. If she could set those ablaze, the fire would draw attention, giving her a chance to reach the stone building. Moving as silently as possible, Clara circled around to approach the hay from the darkest side of the property. She had just reached the stack when a hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream. "Quiet," a voice hissed in her ear. "It's me, Miguel." Clara went still, recognizing the voice of James's ranch hand who had accompanied Cole. The hand removed itself, and she turned to see Miguel crouched beside her, his face dirty and bruised but very much alive. "Miguel," she whispered. "Thank God. Where's Cole, the others?" "Still inside," Miguel replied, his voice barely audible. "Stone building, far side of the property. I managed to escape during the transfer from the cabin. Been hiding, watching for a chance to free the others." "That was my plan too," Clara said. "Create a distraction, then get to that building." Miguel nodded approval. "Good thinking, but we need to be careful. Wells has men everywhere and he's in a killing mood tonight." "How many are inside with the prisoners?" "2 guards outside, 1 inside," Miguel reported. "Cole and the other 3 witnesses are tied up but alive last I saw them." Relief washed over Clara. Cole was alive. Now they just needed to free him before Wells decided he'd outlived his usefulness. "The hay fire is still our best option for a distraction," she said. "Once it's burning, most of the men will rush to put it out. That's when we make our move." Miguel agreed, and they set to work. Using the small box of matches Clara had brought, they set the hay ablaze at several points, ensuring it would catch quickly. Then they retreated to the shadows, waiting. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Flames leapt skyward, illuminating the night. Shouts of alarm rang out as men rushed from bunkhouses and the main house toward the fire, forming a bucket line from the well to combat the blaze. "Now," Miguel whispered, and they moved, staying low and in the shadows, circling around to approach the stone building from behind. As they had hoped, one of the guards had left his post to help with the fire. The remaining guard was alert but distracted, his attention divided between his duty and the commotion across the property. Miguel picked up a rock and threw it, the sound drawing the guard's attention in the wrong direction. As he turned to investigate, Clara crept up behind him and brought the butt of her revolver down hard on the back of his head. The man crumpled without a sound. "Nicely done," Miguel murmured, taking the guard's keys and gun. "Let's move quickly. The fire won't distract them forever." The door creaked as they opened it, revealing a dimly lit interior. The guard inside looked up, startled, only to find himself staring down the barrel of Miguel's confiscated gun. "Don't move," Miguel ordered. "Hands where I can see them." The guard complied, his eyes wide with surprise. Miguel quickly tied him up with ropes hanging on the wall, while Clara rushed to where Cole and the other prisoners were bound to chairs. "Clara," Cole's voice was rough, his face bruised and swollen from what had clearly been a beating. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Rescuing you," she replied, working on the ropes binding his wrists. "Can you walk?" "I'll manage," he said, grimacing as his hands came free and blood rushed back into his fingers. "But we need to hurry. Wells will be back soon." "Where is he?" Clara asked, helping Cole to his feet while Miguel freed the other prisoners. "Main house," Cole replied. "Went to get something. Said he wanted me to see it before he killed me." A chill ran down Clara's spine. Whatever Wells had gone to fetch, it couldn't be good. "Then we need to be gone before he returns. Can everyone move?" The other prisoners, though battered, nodded. One by one, they slipped out of the stone building into the night. The fire was beginning to die down, but it had served its purpose. Most of Wells's men were still occupied on the far side of the property. "This way," Miguel whispered, leading them toward the hills where Clara had left Sundown. "We need to put distance between us and the ranch before they realize you're gone." They moved as quickly as Cole's injuries would allow, supporting him between them when necessary. They had nearly reached the edge of the property when a shout went up from behind them. "They're escaping." "The prisoners are escaping. Run," Cole ordered, pushing Clara ahead of him despite his own pain. "Don't wait for me." But Clara refused to leave him, looping his arm over her shoulders to help him move faster. Behind them, she could hear men shouting, horses being mounted. They reached the spot where she had left Sundown, the horse waiting patiently in the cover of a large mesquite tree. "Mount up," she told Cole. "Take Sundown and go. He can carry too." Cole shook his head. "Not without you. I'll take one of the others," Clara insisted. "You're injured." "You need the horse more." Before Cole could argue further, Miguel returned from where he had been watching their back trail. "They're coming," he reported grimly. "At least 10 men on horseback. We need to split up, give them multiple targets." It was the sensible choice, Clara knew, but the thought of separating from Cole again filled her with dread. "Where will we meet?" she asked. "There's an old line shack about 5 miles west of here," Miguel said. "Used by cowboys during the spring roundup. If we get separated, make for there." Cole pulled Clara close, his eyes intense despite his pain. "Be careful," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I didn't find you just to lose you now." "I will," she promised. "And you too." They shared one brief, fierce kiss before breaking apart, the sound of approaching horsemen growing louder. Cole and one of the witnesses mounted Sundown, heading north. Miguel and another witness went east. Clara and the final witness, an older man named Gareth, headed west, directly toward the line shack. They moved as quickly as possible through the rough terrain, using the darkness and their knowledge of the land to their advantage. Behind them, the pursuing riders split up, some following each group. "We'll never outrun them on foot," Gareth panted as they scrambled up a rocky slope. Not all the way to the line shack. Clara knew he was right. They needed a different strategy. "There," she said, pointing to a narrow ravine ahead. "We can use that for cover, then double back, maybe lose them in the confusion." They slipped into the ravine just as riders appeared on the ridge behind them. For several tense minutes they crouched in the darkness, hardly daring to breathe as the riders searched nearby, their voices carrying in the still night air. "Spread out," a familiar voice ordered. They can't have gone far. Clara's blood ran cold. Bernard Wells himself was leading the pursuit. The situation had just become even more dangerous. When the riders moved off, continuing their search to the west, Clara and Gareth carefully backtracked, working their way toward the line shack by a more circuitous route. The going was slow and difficult, especially for Gareth, who was at least 60 and had been injured during his captivity. Dawn was breaking when they finally spotted the line shack, a small, weathered structure nestled in a stand of juniper trees. Clara approached cautiously, weapon ready, uncertain if any of the others had made it safely. "Clara," Cole's voice came from inside the shack, filled with relief. "Thank God." She rushed inside to find Cole, Miguel, and one of the other witnesses already there. Cole sat on a rough bench, his injuries having been tended as best as possible with limited supplies. When he saw her, he struggled to his feet, pulling her into a tight embrace despite his pain. "I thought they'd caught you," he murmured against her hair, "when we heard riders approaching the shack earlier." "Wells and some of his men," Gareth explained as he sank gratefully onto a wooden crate. "They passed within 100 yards of here, still searching." "They'll be back," Miguel warned. "This is an obvious shelter. We need to keep moving." "Las Cruces," Clara said. "The federal marshals are there by now if we can reach town." Cole nodded, though the movement clearly caused him pain. "It's our best chance, about 10 miles south of here." "If we can find horses, no need," a voice said from the doorway. They all turned, weapons raised, to find James Montgomery standing there, a smile on his weathered face. "I brought plenty." Behind him, Clara could see at least a dozen mounted men ranch hands from the Montgomery spread, all armed and ready. "Catherine told me what you were planning," James explained to Clara. "Figured you might need backup. We've been tracking you since before dawn." Relief washed over Clara. With James and his men, they now had a fighting chance of reaching Las Cruces safely. "Any sign of Wells or his men?" Cole asked, moving toward the door with Clara's help. "Not recently," James replied. "But they're out there. We need to move quickly." They mounted up, Cole sharing a horse with Clara despite his protests that he could ride alone. His body was warm against her back, a reassuring presence despite the danger still facing them. The ride to Las Cruces was tense, every rider alert for signs of pursuit. They avoided the main trails, instead picking their way through arroyos and across scrubland, James leading them on the most direct route possible. They had covered perhaps 5 miles when the first shots rang out. Riders appeared on a ridge to their right, Wells and at least 15 men, closing fast. "Make for that canyon," James shouted, pointing ahead. "We can defend it." They spurred their horses toward the narrow passage between towering rock walls. Once inside, James positioned his men at strategic points, creating a defensive perimeter that would be difficult to breach. Clara helped Cole dismount and find cover behind a large boulder, where he could use his revolver despite his injuries. "Stay low," he told her, checking his weapon. "This is going to get ugly." Wells's men approached the canyon entrance cautiously, having seen the defenders take position. For a long moment, there was silence, broken only by the soft nickering of horses and the wind whistling through the rock formations. Then Bernard Wells's voice echoed through the canyon. "Archer, I know you're in there. Send out the girl and the witnesses and the rest of you can ride away." "Not going to happen, Wells," James called back. "The federal marshals know what you've done. Give yourself up now and maybe they'll show mercy." Wells's laugh was cold and humorless. "You think I'm afraid of some federal lackeys? This is my territory. I own these lands and I own the law that governs them." "Not anymore," Cole shouted, his voice strong despite his injuries. "Your days of owning anything are over, Wells." The standoff continued for several tense minutes, neither side willing to make the first move. Then, to Clara's surprise, she heard the distant sound of many horses approaching from the south, the direction of Las Cruces. More of Wells's men. She whispered to Cole, fear clutching at her heart, but Cole was smiling, the first genuine smile she'd seen since their reunion. "Listen," he said. "That's not Wells's men. Those are federal horses, cavalry trained, regular rhythm, disciplined riders." He was right. The approaching riders moved with a precision that spoke of military training. As they came into view on the ridge south of the canyon, Clara could see the glint of badges and the distinctive hats of U.S. Marshals. "Bernard Wells," a voice called through a speaking trumpet. "This is Marshal Davis of the United States Federal Marshal Service. You and your men are surrounded. Lay down your weapons and surrender peacefully." For a moment, it seemed Wells might resist even these odds. His men looked to him uncertainly, clearly weighing their loyalty against the prospect of facing federal charges. "This isn't over, Archer," Wells shouted, his voice thick with rage. "Not by a long shot." Then, to Clara's astonishment, he wheeled his horse around and rode hard to the east, abandoning his men without a backward glance. Several tried to follow, only to be cut off by marshals who had circled around to block their escape. Within minutes, the remaining men had surrendered, tossing their weapons to the ground and raising their hands. Marshal Davis approached the canyon, where James and his men were emerging from their defensive positions. "James Montgomery," the marshal greeted, dismounting. "Got your telegram. Seems we arrived just in time." "Indeed you did, Marshal," James replied, holstering his weapon. "And we've brought you something worth your trouble: 4 witnesses ready to testify against Bernard Wells for murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, and a host of other crimes." The marshal's eyes widened as he took in the group emerging from the canyon, the battered witnesses: Miguel with his arm in a makeshift sling, Cole leaning heavily on Clara for support. "This will be more than enough to bring him to justice," Davis said, satisfaction evident in his tone. "We've been trying to build a case against Wells for years, but witnesses always disappeared or changed their stories." He looked at Clara curiously. "And you would be Clara Sinclair," she replied. "The woman Wells was trying to force into marriage to settle my father's debts." Davis nodded, understanding. "We've heard about that arrangement. Your father is in custody in Santa Fe, Miss Sinclair. Turns out he was involved in more than just gambling debts, forged land deeds, fraud, various other schemes with Wells." The news of her father's arrest should have shocked Clara, but somehow it didn't. She had known, deep down, that his connection to Wells went beyond simple debt. Her father had always been drawn to the promise of easy money, willing to compromise his principles for the chance at wealth. "What about Wells?" Cole asked, his arm tightening around Clara's waist. "He's still out there." "Not for long," Davis assured him. "I've got men stationed at every town and border crossing within 100 miles. He won't get far." They rode into Las Cruces together, a procession that drew townspeople into the streets to watch. Word of the confrontation had already spread, and many cheered as the witnesses and their rescuers passed by. At the marshal's office, they gave their statements, each witness recounting their experiences with Bernard Wells. Clara described the forced marriage arrangement, her escape with Cole, and everything that had followed. Throughout her testimony, Cole remained by her side, his presence a steady comfort despite his own pain and exhaustion. It was late afternoon when they finally finished. Marshal Davis assured them that their testimony, combined with the evidence already gathered, would be more than enough to convict Wells once he was apprehended. "What happens now?" Clara asked as they left the marshal's office. "Now," Catherine Montgomery said, appearing from across the street where she had been waiting, "you both come home and rest. You've done enough for one day." The Montgomery ranch felt like a sanctuary after the events of the past 24 hours. Catherine insisted on examining Cole's injuries personally, rebandaging his shoulder and tending to the cuts and bruises he'd received during his captivity. Clara stayed by his side throughout, unwilling to let him out of her sight after coming so close to losing him. That evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Cole took her hand in his. "I never thanked you properly," he said quietly. "For coming after me." Clara smiled, squeezing his fingers gently. "Did you really think I wouldn't?" "I hoped you'd be smarter than that," he admitted. "Safer." "There is no safety without you," Clara replied simply. "Not for me, not anymore." Cole's eyes, warm amber in the fading light, met hers. "Clara Sinclair, when I first helped you escape from Aztec, I told myself it was about justice getting back at Wells for what he did to Cora and Charlie. But somewhere along the trail, it became about something else entirely." "What?" she asked, though she already knew the answer in her heart. "You," he said softly. "Your courage, your strength, your heart. I fell in love with you, Clara, probably from that first night when you insisted on riding in your wedding dress if it meant freedom." Joy bloomed in Clara's chest, bright and overwhelming. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since you found me hiding against that barn wall, terrified but determined not to become Bernard Wells's wife." Cole leaned forward, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek as he kissed her gently at first, then with increasing passion as she responded. Unlike their hurried embrace before separating at Wells's ranch, this kiss held promise rather than desperation, a beginning rather than a potential end. When they finally broke apart, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not because your father arranged it or because society expects it, but because we choose each other, freely and completely." "Yes," Clara replied without hesitation. "Nothing would make me happier." The news of their engagement was met with delight by the Montgomerys, who insisted on hosting the wedding at their ranch once things had settled. And settle they did, in ways Clara could scarcely have imagined during those desperate days fleeing from Aztec. 3 days after their return to the Montgomery ranch, word came that Bernard Wells had been apprehended trying to cross into Mexico. He was brought back to Las Cruces in chains, his empire already crumbling as news of his crimes spread throughout the territory. The trial was swift and conclusive, with multiple witnesses testifying to Wells's misdeeds, including murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, land fraud, and corruption. The outcome was never in doubt. Bernard Wells was sentenced to hang, though he cheated the executioner by taking his own life in his cell the night before his scheduled execution. Clara felt no joy at the news, only a sense of closure. The man who had nearly destroyed so many lives, including her own, was gone. Justice, long delayed, had finally been served. She and Cole were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Montgomery ranch. Catherine had helped Clara make a wedding dress not white this time, but a soft blue that matched the New Mexico sky. As she spoke her vows to Cole, surrounded by friends who had become family, Clara marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "I never thought I'd be grateful for my father's gambling debts," she told Cole later as they danced under the stars. "But if he hadn't arranged that marriage to Wells, we might never have met." Cole smiled, pulling her closer. "I would have found you eventually," he said with certainty. "Some things are meant to be, no matter what paths we take to get there." After the wedding, they bought a small ranch outside Las Cruces, using money from the sale of Wells's assets, which the court had divided among his victims. The land was good, with a clear stream running through it and enough pasture for the horses Cole began to raise and train. Catherine Montgomery helped Clara establish a small school on their property, where she taught not only reading and writing, but also self-reliance and independence to young women from across the territory. Many were girls from difficult circumstances, some escaping arranged marriages of their own. others seeking opportunities beyond what their families envisioned for them. As the years passed, their family grew. Their first child, a son they named Charles Thomas in honor of both Charlie and Thomas Red Wolf, was born a year after their wedding. A daughter, Catherine Cora, followed 2 years later, and eventually another son, James Miguel. They never forgot the sacrifices that had made their happiness possible: Cora's death, Charlie's murder, Thomas Red Wolf's courage. But they honored those memories by living fully and loving deeply, creating the kind of life that would have made their lost loved ones proud. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole took Clara back to the spot where they had first kissed, during their flight from Aztec. The landscape was unchanged: the same towering mesas, the same endless sky, the same sense of both vulnerability and freedom that the open desert inspired. "Do you ever regret it?" Cole asked as they sat side by side on a sun-warmed rock, watching their children play nearby. Running away that night, all the danger that followed, Clara considered the question seriously, as was her way. "Not for a moment," she finally replied. "Even in our darkest hours, when I thought we might not survive, I never regretted choosing freedom, choosing you." Cole's arm tightened around her waist. "Nor I. Every step of that journey, even the bullets and the pain, brought me to this moment, here with you. I wouldn't change a thing." As the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Clara rested her head on Cole's shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single, courageous step into the unknown. Her father had arranged her marriage to a cruel man, and a cowboy had helped her escape the night before. But what had started as a desperate flight had become something far more precious: a love story written across the wild landscapes of New Mexico. A tale of courage, sacrifice, and the kind of love that transforms lives. And as their children called to them, eager to return home before dark, Clara and Cole rose together, hand in hand, ready to continue the journey they had begun that fateful night so many years ago, a journey that had led them not just to freedom, but to each other.